Liz Cheney, who used to be the third most powerful House Republican, just lost a re-election campaign in Wyoming, only earning 29% of the vote, despite how influential she was only 2 years ago. Why is this the case? Has the Republican Party completely just lost to the cult of Trump? And could this spell disaster for Republicans come 2022 and 2024? Let's talk about it. So I don't know if you guys heard, but Liz Cheney just lost her re-election campaign. Liz Cheney, of course, is the daughter of Dick Cheney. She's part of a political dynasty. She used to be the third most powerful House Republican, and she just lost her re-election campaign to Harriet Hagman. Or Hageman, I don't know how to say the last name, but we'll say that she is a Trump Republican, this Harriet figure, and she lost brutally, Liz. It wasn't even a close election. It wasn't like, 59 or 41 or, 55 to 45. It was 66 to 29. 66 to 29. Liz Cheney didn't even break 30%. I mean, that is a pretty brutal curb stomping, if I do say so myself. And we saw a lot of people like Tucker Carlson and other commentators coming out and celebrating the loss of Liz Cheney as the Trump wing of the Republican Party picks up another W against the old establishment rhino crowd, right? Now look, I don't like Liz Cheney. I'm not a fan of Liz Cheney whatsoever. I don't like her stance on torture. I don't like her stance on drug legalization. I don't like her stance on the Iraq War. I don't like her stance on Yemen. I don't like her stance on basically everything. There's really not a lot I would agree with her on. I mean, she even threw her own sister under the bus when it came to gay marriage, and only recently finally admitted that maybe she was wrong on gay marriage. So she's not my type of politician. I would never vote for her under basically any circumstances. But that doesn't mean we can't recognize that her loss does have some symbolism within the Republican Party and could have consequences for our democracy as a whole. You cannot like Liz Cheney and still recognize what her loss means for the Republican Party. And that's what I want to talk about today. What the loss of Liz Cheney from the Republican House means. Because it's not, wow, we lost Liz Cheney, what a loss for our country because we're going to lose all of her great ideas. It's, wow, why did she lose? Did she lose because she had a terrible stance on the drug war? Did she lose because she wanted to invade Iran and everybody said that was silly? Did she lose because she has a million other ridiculous positions? Or did she lose because she held the one position that was actually reasonable when it came to the 2020 election? And I do want to say, and I want to just make sure to clarify this, that once again, I wouldn't vote for her. And when I see these Hill columnists like BJ Ruddle coming out with, oh, maybe she should run for president, Liz Cheney for president, oh my gosh, wouldn't that be based? Remember, she's still an old guard style Republican. She still holds the stances she does on Iraq. She still holds the stances that she does on Guantanamo Bay and on waterboarding. She still holds the stances that she does on a million different conservative issues. Just because she rejects the fact that Donald Trump won the 2020 election and she says that is wrong, that is bad because, she's not completely insane, does not mean she would make a good president or vice president. I've saw a few people like, oh, maybe a Biden-Liz Cheney ticket. Joe Biden is a very old man. He is one of the presidents who I'm extra concerned about possibly, passing away since he's old. And the last thing I would want to do is have the Democrats win an election and then hand over power to a Republican presidential candidate because we wanted to play bipartisanship. Nah, I'm good. Now, the reason why Liz Cheney lost. Liz Cheney was largely running on the fact that she does not accept Donald Trump's election claims from 2020. Donald Trump has openly said that he won the 2020 election. He said the only reason that he's not president is because of large-scale voter fraud. He rejected the results of the 2020 election, and this rejection of results, and he did it before the election even happened. I mean, on the campaign trail, he was saying actively, if I lose, it was rigged. There was no circumstance where Donald Trump loses the election and he just like, oh, okay, I lost. I'm going to accept it gracefully. That was never going to be something he was going to accept. I mean, even in the 2016 Republican primary, when he would lose any state primary, any local primary, he would just blame it on the election being rigged and it being all set up against him. And so this is somebody who can't accept a loss in a democracy, and a democracy does not function if one of the major parties does not accept defeat. And so Liz Cheney recognized this fact, saw the violence that occurred on January 6th, and despite all of her horrendous positions, took one correct position, which was, hey, I'm going to meet the bare minimum for living in a democracy and say, if we lose an election, we lost. If we win an election, we win. Donald Trump didn't win. He should stop pushing these lies about election fraud. And she did treat it seriously. She saw it for the threat to democracy that it was. And that was ultimately her downfall. I mean, with Cheney's loss, it isn't just Cheney who is the one that has to, reconcile with the fact that telling the truth about 2020 does not get you a place in the modern Republican Party. I mean, there's only 2 House Republicans who actually voted to impeach Trump that are going to be on the ballot in November. It seems the message that the Republican Party is sending is that if you reject Trump, if you accept the results of the 2020 election, if you don't lie to your audience about who won in 2020, then you don't really have a place within the modern Republican Party, which is very concerning to hear. And again, Liz Cheney wasn't just some run-of-the-mill Republican. She went from the 3rd most powerful House position in the Republican Party. She was climbing up the ranks year after year after year. She had a promising future within the Republican Party, for a career, that is, not for actually changing people's lives and making it better. And all of that was trash just because she couldn't accept the results of the 2020 election. And some people might say, well, how do we know that was because of the 2020 election? It's on the record. We know it's on the 2020 election. The vote to take her from the 3rd most powerful House position might have been off the record, but we know the reason why was because the Republican Party couldn't accept somebody who was telling the truth about 2020. In fact, the BBC reports, Mrs. Cheney's fate was decided in less than 20 minutes by House Republicans behind closed doors on Wednesday morning. Colleagues reportedly applauded her leadership tenure, but Ms. Cheney drew boos when she spoke during the session and said, "We cannot let the former president drag us backward and make us complicit in his efforts to unravel our democracy." The ballot was not recorded, but lawmakers cast an overwhelming voice vote in favor of removing Ms. Cheney from her post. Immediately following her removal, she told reporters, "I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office." Now, while only 2 House Republicans actually voted to impeach Trump and they're going to be on the ballot in November, indicating that any of, the dissenters or never Trumpers are generally being purged from the party, over 100 GOP primary winners back Trump's false fraud claims about the election. That means there's 100 people running for office who are at risk of just not recognizing election results in the future. There's 100 people who are going to openly lie in favor of their candidate if they lose an election results. 100 people are willing to compromise on the truth about democracy if it means that they can get access to Trump bucks, if they can get access to the Trump cult, and they can get access to Trump support. And let's be honest and name what it is. It is a cult. If you need to lie, and you know you're lying, if you need to lie in order to get people's support about what happened in 2020, just plain pretend and LARPing for the emotions of a former game show host, you need to step out into the public and say, he won the election, this is all fraudulent, there's no evidence that Joe Biden's the real president, this was all rigged, he's an illegitimate president, and you're going out there just to save face with Donald Trump. You are acting like a cult. And this isn't just a few House Republicans. Again, more than 100 of these primary winners back his claims. That's on top of the people who are already elected into office, both in the House and the Senate, who back his claims. Or Trump people on Fox News, people on OAN, people on Newsmax, all of these commentators. We're seeing more and more and more people come to the realization, not necessarily that, hey, Trump actually did win in 2020, because I don't think really many of these people genuinely believe that, but I'm seeing more and more of them come to the realization that it's going to be very difficult for them to have a career in the Republican Party moving forward. It's going to be very difficult for them to have a career in right-wing politics in this country, whether it be in online commentary, news broadcasting, or as an elected official or in some super PAC, if they don't reject the results of the 2020 election and undercut trust in our democracy. And what message does Liz Cheney's loss send? I mean, again, it wasn't a close loss. It was a brutal loss. She only got 29% of the vote, if that. What message does that send? It sends the message of not only can you not win in the Republican Party if you don't submit to the cult of Trump and just lie about 2020 to placate this man's feelings, but it also sends the message that you will lose brutally, that it will not be close. It is impossible, with only a few examples breaking from that trend. Look, the modern Republican Party, whatever you want to call it, its old values are dead when it comes to respecting democracy. And that's not to say that the old values of the Republican Party, at least the Republican Party of the last 50, 60 years, were ever really worth saving. I mean, it's always been, tax cuts for the rich, cutting social services for the poor, invade this country, invade that country, invade this country. They're not policies that I would generally agree with, and I don't think they're policies that the majority of Americans agree with. I don't think anybody wants to go back to the party of Dick Cheney, her father. Hilariously, by the way, Dick Cheney actually did record an ad for Liz Cheney, talking about, we need to trust our democracy, and hey, Donald Trump's a coward and he lied to his supporters, which is dishonest and bad. And I mean, there is an irony with Dick Cheney talking about, respecting the truth and not lying to your supporters. But that party of Dick Cheney, that party of Liz Cheney, is dead. Even if those people were insane, they were not insane enough to reject the results of a democratic election in the United States, because they at least valued on some level stability in the United States, or at least some continuation of American democracy. Al Gore, Bush, etc., rada. Even if we could talk about that all day, it's just not comparable to what happened in 2020. There wasn't no splitting hairs in Florida and hanging chads. It was just a complete blowout of Donald Trump, and he just didn't want to accept it. So the Republican Party, as we once knew it, when it comes to the party of Lincoln, has been long dead. But now we know the Republican Party, as we knew it when it comes to the respect to democracy, is also dead. When it comes to a commitment to, dedicating itself to, we will respect the peaceful transition of power and not cheer as people charge the Capitol steps. But what about electorally? What does this mean for the Republican Party going into 2022 and 2024? Is this kind of strategy going to play well with voters, or are they electorally dead as well? Well, there's this YouTuber called Beau of the Fifth Column that I sometimes watch on occasion. I'm sure if you're watching this channel, you might have heard of him. He records a lot of videos from a left-wing perspective, really smart guy, and he released a video recently talking about Liz Cheney's loss that actually made me reflect a decent amount, because I have usually looked at this loss with a lot of disdain and the idea of look, this shows the Republican Party continually to devolve. I don't like Liz Cheney, but the reason she lost wasn't because she had good policies. The reason she lost was because she was at least telling the truth about 2020. And this is really bad to see one of the major parties just completely reject democracy and reject the fact that they could lose an election. But Beau of the Fifth Column had another conclusion that I do think is actually pretty intelligent. I didn't really think about this. And that is that 25 to 29%, that's probably going to be the range, maybe 30%, somewhere in that range, for Liz Cheney getting votes in this election, even if she was the incumbent, even if she has a long history of winning elections in Wyoming, could actually spell disaster for the Republican Party come 2022 and 2024. And I know, of course, that sounds strange. How can Liz Cheney getting blown out in the Republican Party spell disaster for Republicans come 2022 and 2024? Well, the thing is, this wasn't a general election. Democrats didn't vote in this, and independents didn't vote in this. This was a Republican primary, meaning that everybody voted in this primary, everybody who voted for Liz Cheney and everybody who voted for her opponent, the election denier, were Republicans. Meaning that 29% of Republicans in Wyoming voted for Liz Cheney, who has openly said on multiple occasions that one of her main goals now is going to stop Donald Trump from ever becoming president again. That one of her main goals is making sure that we respect the truth about what happened in 2020. When you frame it like that over 1 in 4 Republicans voted for somebody who openly condemns and is calling for the likely presidential nominee in 2024, unless, of course, the criminal charges come up and bite him, and, of course, the FBI raid is bringing a lot of hellfire to his career. But one of the possible nominees in 2024, Donald Trump, and 29% of Republicans voted for her, when one of her main issues she was running on, and she was running on it, if you watched that Dick Cheney ad, she certainly was, running on Donald Trump lost 2020 and we need to respect that. If Republicans, while knowing that 1/4 of their party possibly, I mean, we don't know how many Republicans really, but possibly 1/4 of their party is looking at them and saying, Donald Trump is insane. Donald Trump rejected the results of the 2020 election. Donald Trump does not respect our democracy, and Donald Trump encouraged violence on January 6th. He's not my type of Republican. Bring back the old guard. Bring back Mitt Romney. Bring back Liz Cheney. If 1/4 of Republicans are holding that position, that might not mean much in a Republican primary. But if enough of those people just don't vote, or possibly vote the other way in general, that could be quite significant. And that's not even talking about independents, because that 2020 election denying stuff does not play well with independents. Donald Trump's approval rating, which was quite low when he left office, hasn't skyrocketed now that he's been out of office. I know that a lot of times, I know this happened with Obama, once a president is out of office, a lot of times their approval ratings go up because, what's the term? What's that old term? Something like them being away makes the heart grow fonder. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. That was true for Obama, but that hasn't been true for Donald Trump. It could be that the taste of 2020 and this man denying the results of the 2020 election left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And you want to know what? He kind of looks like a whiner when he goes on and on about how he lost and how he truly was the winner and they need to correct this grand mistake. So if this isn't going to play well with 1/4 of the Republican Party, and it's definitely not going to play well with independents, and Democrats are a given, what does that mean if Republicans end up running on, in part, Donald Trump won the 2020 election in 2022, or come 2024, and if, hopefully not, I think this FBI stuff has really, hurt Trump's career politically, but let's say Trump wins again in 2024, he's ultimately probably going to run on the fact that he won in 2020. The dude's too much of an egomaniac not to. And that's going to do really, really poorly with independents. And even poorly with a decent chunk of his own party. So I hadn't really considered that until I heard Beau talk about it. And I thought that was a really, really good point. And so while this is bad, because this means that the Republican Party has completely given way to the cult of Trump. I don't think this was the moment the Republican Party gave way to the cult of Trump. I think it gave way to the cult of Trump a while ago. I think it's been like this for a decent amount of time now. I do think this is kind of like a canary in the coal mine situation, announcing just how much the Republican Party has given way to the cult of Trump, which is at least over 70% in the state of Wyoming. Every state, of course, would be slightly different. There seems to be a silver lining, though. And that silver lining is at least 29% of Republicans in the state of Wyoming did stick with Liz Cheney over Donald Trump and over her election-denying opponent. And that even with her running on an anti-Trump platform as a Republican, she was still able to get 29% of the vote. And that could mean, come a general election, that 29%, some of them will stick with the Republicans, because, hey, they'll think like, look, even if I preferred Liz Cheney, a Republican's better than any Democrat, some of them might break with the Republican nominee. They might not go vote for a Democrat, but maybe they'll vote Libertarian and split the vote. Putting 20% of your party up in the air on whether they're going to vote for you, or up to 30% of your party up in the air on whether they're going to vote for you, is not a good election strategy. Definitely, if you know, the reason that 20 to 30% is breaking with you is also the same reason a lot of independents are breaking with you. While this might spell disaster for the Republican Party's respect for our democracy, it also could spell disaster for their election chances come 2022 and 2024. And this is all also taking place at the same time that Joe Biden is passing some of the most influential pieces of legislation he has during his administration. Is it going as far as I would want it? No, but it's certainly having an impact. We're seeing some of his polling numbers improve, and it looks like the Democrats actually have a decent chance now of keeping the House. If you look at the polling data with John Fetterman, look at the polling data of Tim Ryan, look at any of the polling data for the general Democrats' performance in the Senate, and they're possibly going to turn that around in the House as well, but that's going to be much more difficult. But if the Republicans choose to just hitch themselves to this bad strategy going into 2022 and 2024, I mean, that's their fault, and they're going to reap what they sow. And the thing is about cults, whether you look at Jamestown or Waco, they usually don't end well. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you can, please do support me on Patreon. It's expensive to go to Ukraine and do all this news coverage from the front and from inside Ukraine. So I would appreciate any support you guys could throw my way as I try to pay my staff and make sure that I have a full stomach. Thank you guys so much. Have a good weekend.